Well, hello. We're back again for part 3, concluding part of Dragon Teeth. Now, for the second part, I did try to add in quite the action that was in that section of the book. But to continue on, after William Johnson arrives to Deadwood, this kind of town in the middle of nowhere, which just has the white Americans that are arrived to mine the local area, but also they had Chinese, the Chinese who came over to with them that had shops and laundries and all these stores. Now, when William Johnson arrives, Toad was pretty much already dead. He was immediately killed during the attack. And what ended up happening was that he had him wrapped and he had him all set so that when it was safe to do so, he would be able to bury Toad. With LiQWYD, on the other hand, LiQWYD did his best to stay alive as much as possible while he guided William Johnson to safety. And I say this because he had been attacked on the side, on his can't remember if it was right or left flank, but he was pierced by an arrow and he was bleeding a lot. But LiQWYD was able to stay alive enough to guide William Johnson to the south to safety before he dies. He passes away. William Johnson barely makes it alive to Deadwood. He's basically has fainted by the time he arrives, and he was brought in by some sort of hotel, so the hotel manager or owner, I should say. He brings him in, and then he kind of explains what happened once he wakes up. He is not allowed to bury LiQWYD. Being a Native American, he's not allowed to be buried with the other people in the cemetery. He could bury Toad, but not LiQWYD. What William Johnson proceeds to do was that he buries Toad, and he finds a quiet place where to bury LiQWYD. And at that moment, he is now a resident of Deadwood. Why? Because there's only two routes to get there, the north and the south. He had it from the north route, and nobody was really expecting anybody to arrive from there, especially with the current Indian Wars situation. However, on the path that comes from the south, there is an issue because there's a lot of bandits, there's a lot of thieves, there's a lot of murdering going on in that route. People that are just looking for treasures to sell and gain their own riches. That means that in order to travel down the southern path, he actually needs an escort. He needs to travel on these carts, messenger carts. He's not able to because he doesn't have that kind of money. Because obviously, supply and demand. Because there's little supply, the demand makes it worth more. And so I believe it was around 110, 120. It was quite a lot of money at that time for him to actually leave along with the fossils. Remember, he had retrieved the fossils when he arrived to their original camp. So what happens is that he starts looking for work and finding ways to earn money, because not just does he need money to leave, he needs money to continuously pay for storage space for his fossils, and he also needs to pay for his own food and his own room over at the hotel. So there is that. He's not able to do much because he's not a miner, he's not a shooter, he doesn't gamble. He does, however, take photographs. And apparently there used to be a photographer, but he was assassinated, he was murdered. And what ended up happening was that the chemicals that photographer used, well, they're not being used because nobody knows how to use them. But guess who does? William Johnson. And that's how he earns his living. He starts taking photography on everybody. He rents a studio, takes photography of minors, of their families, of the people in the town. He takes photography all over the place. And he starts earning that money in order to leave. He gets into trouble with the Curry brothers. And these are brothers who are more than anything, they're bandits, they're murderers, they are thieves. And one in particular, which was the oldest, he had his eye on him, as in, he had it in for that guy. To not make the story too long, since everybody is very fascinated with his fossils, they don't believe that he has fossils. They think that it's actually gold. Because what are fossils? Bones. And what are you going to do with bones if you're not going to cook them? So they didn't really believe him that there were just bones. They thought that he was actually hiding like gold or silver or something. And so there was a lot of interest in finding out what he was actually hiding. And at this point, that's where he meets this lovely woman. And by woman, I mean William Johnson is 18. And in the book it says that she is a few years older than him, so she couldn't be more than 21, 22. And, well, according to her, after she spends the day with him looking at photographs on the pretense of looking for her brother, and also kind of talking to him and just in general being nice, she confesses that she was in cahoots with the Curry brothers because they wanted to know what he has in his crates. They didn't believe that it was just bones. They thought that he had something else. And that's when he insists, well, no, I only have fossils. That's what they are. They don't have value in of themselves, but they're valuable for science because, it's a scientific discovery. It's something that people haven't seen. But it's not something tangible that you can just sell and get money. Well, that happened. He realizes that he has to leave because in 2 separate occasions, he gets visited at night and they try to steal his fossils, and they aren't successful. So he needs to leave as soon as he can. He is able to hire services of these 2 brothers, the Earp brothers. Mainly he talks with Wyatt. But, both Wyatt and Morgan, they're not really... They're like very much for hire. So it's not like they're very friends with him at this point. But they agree on a plan and they proceed to leave. The only problem is that because he had taken a photograph at the hotel, he inadvertently actually took a photograph at the time where in the hotel the oldest of the Curry brothers had killed somebody, and there was proof that he killed him. And when he took it over to the only law enforcing person there, the only judge, like apparently they don't have a sheriff, but they do have a judge. So when he does his investigations, he finds out, okay, this Curry brother killed the guy, so we're gonna do something. They don't do anything. They manage to leave, and they do manage to escape from the Curry brothers, who ambushed them at the middle of a river. But at that time, and this is going to sound kind of difficult to explain, when they arrive to this one town, William Johnson happens to stumble upon Professor Marsh. How did Professor Marsh know he was going to be there, or was it just a coincidence? I'm not too sure, but he does meet with Professor Marsh, who happens to kind of find him, apparently. Professor Marsh starts negotiating with Wyatt because they had previously met, and so the agreement was when he met William Johnson or anybody who had the fossils at Deadwood, that he would take the fossils to him, and that, that's how they're going to do their deal. And William Johnson feels betrayed, but as the girl kind of explained, and here's the thing, I kind of refuse to say her name because she changes her name several times, so we'll call her Emily. When they're sitting at a different table watching how they're making a deal over the fossils, which, William Johnson's kind of very petrified, like, what? I recovered them. I spent a lot of time in a place where it was, violent and just unpleasant, and I've gone through all this trouble just for this guy to sell them. And Emily was like, hey, if he would have wanted to sell the fossils, Wyatt would have already done so. So what do you think he's trying to do? And that's when William kind of falls into the realization that, oh, right, he's given him time. So the play was, he goes over to, he buys like 1,000 pounds of rice, and he replicates what Toad or Sternberg, whichever the two, had done this method to preserve the fossils, which was cook the rice in a way that is very mushy, very much like clay, and you submerge the fossils in it so that it stays put together. Otherwise, being out in the environment, it kind of dries out and starts breaking apart, and it's very fragile. So you have them in this mushy clay-like substance, and it's better protected. So he does that. He takes the fossils out, and what he puts into the newly made mush are cement blocks, and these are kind of debris from what was being constructed in town. So it's debris that was no longer used, but it has the weight as if it were bone. So he puts it in, he puts them in the old boxes, he buys new boxes, puts the new bones in. When Professor Marsh finishes the deal, he takes the boxes with the fake fossils, not seeing the actual fossils, but just takes them. And William actually makes a good acting, as in, oh, don't take them, yes, I'm going to take them, oh no, that type of thing. So Professor Marsh leaves with the non-fossils while he takes the actual fossils. To not make the story even longer, he arrives back to Cheyenne, where Emily shows that she's not actually Emily, she has a different name. So he goes home, but he also gets into the same conflict as Professor Cope. Remember, Cheyenne was where Professor Cope was accused of having murdered his own father and was being arrested. Well, the thing was happening because when he tried to telegraph his send a telegraph to his father saying, oh, hey, I need money to go back home, he responded, well, no, my son just died. He died in an attack. So he didn't believe him, because remember, when the attack happened, it not only did that happen, but Cook actually betrayed them and went back. He left them alone, saying, you know what, I'm not going to bother with any of you. I'm not going to risk my life for just nonsense, for just bits of bones. And he told them, well, we were attacked and they died. So at this point, everybody thinks that he died. And when we get to this point of the story, remember, from summer, we're talking about August, September, we're now in October. So a few months have passed already, and people think that he is dead. Well, he does convince the sheriff by sending a message from prison, he sends a message saying, well, it's not prison, it's more like jail, but he does the message of, oh, hey, Dad, it's me, Pinky. I did not die. Remember this, remember that, blah, blah, blah. Things that only he would know. And that convinces his father that, okay, he is still alive. He is who he says he is. So he sends the money. He leaves as soon as possible. And the girl, well, she stays. And we don't know what happens to her. She is gone from the story. When he arrives back into Pennsylvania, to his home, he is very much different. I mean, by this point, he already has a scar on his lip. By the time he's already been, well, because of the conditions, he's a little bit leaner, but also more muscular. Leaner that he doesn't have that much fat, but now he has a little bit more muscles. He's a little bit thicker. And, he arrives. It's it's homecoming, that type of thing. They welcome him back. He goes and sees Professor Cope, and he brings back the fossils, saying, here they are. And Professor Cope is ecstatic to see him again. Well, him and the fossils. He goes back to the school, and jail actually does allow him, due to the circumstances, to go back rather than wait an entire year. Because, remember, classes had already started. And here's kind of like a... it's not funny, but when he arrives and people are like staring, and he goes to his own rival, who had made the bet, he says, hey, you owe me $1,000. Where's the proof? Give me $1,000. I don't owe you anything. He grabs the guy, and he kind of roughs him up a bit. There's no hitting and there's no bashing, but he does get very intense. And so the guy gets scared and says, yeah, I'll give you your money. Okay, there is that. And from then on, that's where the story ends. It does go on into like an epilogue saying, yeah, that Professor Cope, he eventually dies after having, gone through all that energy from having to deal with Marsh and his nonsense, but also after going through the family fortune, doing whatever he has to do. Professor Marsh, he dies alone. So there is that. Now, there's a couple of things I want to address. As part of my concluding thoughts, as I mentioned previously in part 2, you wouldn't really tell that this is within the Jurassic Park world. That's in the world where, in the same universe as Jurassic Park. The only mention of dinosaurs have been the fossils, and they're just barely uncovering them. But it's not like they make much of a work about them. It's just, what they go through to actually excavate the fossils, to retrieve them, take care of them. And they do mention, the professor starts classifying the fossils and gives them this name and that name and blah blah blah. But other than that, they don't make like a whole thing about that. It's very normal within the story, within the context. It's more of like the journey of this one man who ultimately doesn't seem to have doesn't leave a mark in history that is significant for Jurassic Park, or for the events that lead to Jurassic Park and all that. However, there are a couple of things that tie it to the Jurassic Park. First of all, in the cover of the book, where it says Dragon Teeth, they have the head of a T-Rex, and on top of them they have kind of like Western style with a carriage and all that stuff. So with that T-Rex head, you can kind of say, well, it's kind of similar to the skeleton of T-Rex that they have over in Jurassic Park in the first movie, when they enter the building and they have this humongous skeleton. Well, it's kind of reminiscent of that. But the other thing is that when they discover these dragon teeth. And it's kind of misleading because you would think dragon teeth as in sharp, pointy teeth, but no, there's just teeth. And they are identified as belonging to a huge creature that when they step on the earth, it would have caused a sound as roaring as thunder. And that is a brontosaurus. Which, again, back to Jurassic Park, the first movie, the first dinosaur that the group meets is a brontosaurus, who is eating from the top of the tree and stands up on his 2 feet, and then when it gets back down, it's just a rumbling on the earth, and it's this sonorous, vibrations that you get from the magnitude, from the dimensions of this creature. So, just to keep that in mind, those are kind of like the two things I thought that were akin or that link back to the series. But other than that, you wouldn't really tell. And I would have, although I did like the book in general, it didn't feel like a Jurassic Park book. It didn't seem like it fit in. Now, if we get back to the characters, the character named Emily, she wasn't consequential to the story in any way. Sure, she kept Will and Johnson company, but then again, when they were in the parts that they were together, he was mainly with the Earp brothers, Wyatt and Morgan. So it wouldn't really matter if she wasn't part of the story, and it really didn't fit in. And even at the end when they split off, it was more of, oh, you lied to me and I'm going, and that's it. I mean, there's nothing more to it because they make it. The book makes them kind of go into this quasi relationship, but at some point, for no reason, she starts saying, "Oh, you lied," and then she looks up at somebody that is there and says, "Oh, hey," and he calls her for another name, and apparently she's a lobbyist over in Washington. So it gets really confusing as to why she's actually there, as she doesn't come true to the story. There is no payoff at the end between the relationship between her and William. And really, if you take her out of the story, there's no impact. So I'm really not sure why she was even added to begin with. Other than that, I would say that this is a good book. I mean, for what it is a good book about discovery, about a boy finding his way into becoming his own man. I mean, he's really not, he didn't become a paleontologist, he didn't do anything of that sort, but he gained a renewed confidence in himself and his skills, and kind of opened his eyes to what the world is about. So that's where I would say that is a good story. It's always a good story. However, references to the Jurassic Park, just to kind of show that there is a connection. But other than that, from what I've also read in the, well, it's no longer an epilogue, but it's kind of like what comes after that. We have that this is actually based on true people, like actual people that actually existed. Professor Othoniel March and Professor Cope, Edward Drinker Cope, I think that was his name. These two were actual paleontologists at that time, and they did have a rivalry, and it was pretty ugly. There are a couple of things that they changed, such as the fake fossils. Well, not the fake fossils, but fabricating a new creature from fossils that belong to different species, and saying, "Oh, this is a different species altogether." That play was actually done by Marsh on Cope. And other than that, yeah, I mean, It did happen, as in these people did existed and all that, but this whole journey to the West is obviously fictitious just for the sake of this one character, William Johnson. The events that were described about finding the fossils and all of that, it took the course of years, and this took in the place of just one summer. So they did kind of change the timeline a bit. But other than that, I mean, it's fascinating because I didn't know that that was a thing that happened, or that these people actually existed. So that was kind of nice to see. I've spent a lot of time already on this, so I'll just finish up saying that the story was great for what it was. It didn't feel like it fit in with the Jurassic Park universe, but for what it is, it's still enjoyable. I would still read it at a later time, kind of to reread it. It's very quick to read. I mean, it's only like 300 pages, but it does go by very fast. Other than that, that's about it. I'll be reviewing other books of the series. I think the next one I'll be reading is, let's see, I have it here, Dead Islands. Although I don't know if I should read this first or Jurassic Park. Anyway, we'll get to that in a bit. What were your thoughts on this? Have you read it? Did you even know it was a book? Did you even hear about, I believe it was National Geographic, who made a contract back in 2016 to make this book into a limited TV series? Apparently it didn't go through because I haven't seen any other news regarding it. However, that's it. Take care, and remember, be kind to those around you. You never know what they're going through. See you later.